how do we make our community stronger? How do we make our community more vibrant? How do we make our community safer? All these things are, they're interdependent. They're not exclusive to themselves. They all can work together in harmony. And the more we can do, I still believe in, that, we can be progressive in a society and be woke and be all these things that sometimes have strangely odd connotations now. What if we do these things together? Because I'm going to tell you, it's also going to increase personal wealth. It also can increase the wealth of businesses. It can also increase GDP. It can also be an economic driver, a growth driver.
Welcome to Unlocking Commerce and Business. I'm Connie Davis. Like a lighthouse cutting through fog, this marketplace of voices illuminates where commerce systems break down and what's already working to repair them. We go deep into communities, exploring where pain hides behind financial systems, uncovering extraction patterns in relationships, blocks in money movement, and barriers creating economic instability for vulnerable populations. From survivors of economic abuse to system innovators, these conversations don't just diagnose, they point toward trauma-informed, human-centered solutions. Essential listening for collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers building regenerative alternatives. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Now let's get into today's conversation.
Okay, so we're live. Thank you guys for being here with me. This is, I am really excited about the conversation today. So I am all about unlocking topics that open up the visibility for community leaders to see what other community leaders are doing. So it's a big part of what I do on the show. I love to hear CEO visions. I love to hear thought leader visions. So before we get started, though, and dive into some of the questions, can you tell me a little bit about you and your role and your organization and what is so important that the community needs to hear today?
Go ahead, Rich.
I'm Rich Alvarez. I'm the Director of Employment Services for People Empowering and Restoring Communities, or PERC. My role is to find employment and to seek employers to put ex-offenders to work in upwardly mobile careers.
Mm.
I'm Michael Gelazo. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of PERC. We're actually the Pinellas Ex-Offender Reentry Coalition. That's what PERC stands for. But we did a DBA as People Empowering and Restoring Communities actually about 6 years ago, because for about 4 reasons, and it sort of explains a little bit about who we are. One, we do more than just work with returning citizens. And we started workforce programs with the city of St. Petersburg on what we call pre-entry, working with high risk or at risk young people in the Cohort of Champions program with the city of St. Petersburg. We actually are the organization that created and started St. Pete Works. That's now going into a third funding cycle, and it'll be its 8th year in partnership with St. Petersburg College. They're the lead agency now, but we're, still collaborative partners. And so as we did that, so we're trying to really reflect who we are and what we do. We have a harm reduction program, and people will say, wait a minute, harm reduction, it's got a needle exchange program, which is controversial. Isn't that opposite of what you do? And it's not. I mean, when you really think about who our clients are, in terms of the opioid epidemic in Pinellas County and the Tampa Bay region, but even the state of Florida, being in the middle of that fight. And these are our clients. These are the people we work with. So we did that for that reason. Second, we're in multiple counties. We're not just Pinellas. We have 2 offices in Pasco County. We actually have a presence in Manatee County in harm reduction, and we do a lot of work in Hillsborough County. In fact, one of our federal programs is really for citizens returning to Pinellas and Hillsborough County. So, and then the third reason, honestly, is when you say Pinellas Sex Offender Reentry Coalition, oh, you're the sex offender people. We do work with sex offenders, but because the S and the E in Pinellas to X, it's not a big part of what we do. There's other organizations that do more. And so when you start thinking of it from a funder standpoint, or from just how we raise funds to be able to offer the services we do, that people empowering and restoring communities better reflects us, but also doesn't define us either. And I think it's important, when we're working with employers or we're working in certain communities or in chambers of commerce or looking at different things, that people start with an open mind and hear our story. Is that, and our strategic vice president for development will say, well, we should only use this term. Well, people say PERC, they get it confused with park, but we've been around for a long time now. We're kind of closing in on 30 years. But we're trying to empower people. We're trying to help people. And the term Rich used, in terms of upwardly mobile career pathways, the best, when you talk about this work, the best thing you can do is help people have a legitimate shot at building personal wealth in a legal way, right?
Legal.
And finding those pathways. One of the guys that I'll probably highlight as we're talking is someone who I believe by February 29th or March 9th or whatever it is going to start full time with the city of St. Petersburg. He's pre-release right now at the Community Release Center in South St. Pete. And while he was away, he started getting certifications in wastewater treatment, wastewater plants, stuff like that. Did our tiny house pre-release class where he got OSHA 30, a couple of stack certifications related to construction. And we've been working with the city of St. Petersburg for so long, and we're finally at that final stage. And here's a guy who's going to be making close to $57,000 a year, and he's still pre-release in prison. And he's married, and he has kids, and he's talking about his future. One of the things when I talked to him yesterday, I was going to tell you, he's like, well, as this works out, maybe working for Pinellas County might be a bet. I'm like, dude, you better stay with the city of St. Petersburg.
After all the work you've done
for a while. I said, but once you're released and this is your future, you build that reputation, Pinellas County does make sense.
But I love how he's feeling his value. Like that power is being restored inside of him. And that is hugely empowering for him. And that's exactly the words. Like that mobility just starts to activate inside.
Yeah, he was even talking about buying a house.
Oh, see, yeah.
Well, and we're going to be writing the youth build grant with the Department of Labor. One of the little projects, it's not little. One of the initiatives that we've been working on with Habitat for Humanity Tampa Bay Gulf side, and this is going to be really read into this grant, is Mike Sutton, their CEO, and I had this idea that we pitched to the city of St. Petersburg. Mayor Welsh liked it, but working with jurisdictions always takes time, where if they're in our pre-release program, right, they're going to be building tiny houses and getting these stack certifications, that if once they're post-release, that they would have priority for rental with us. If they continue to work in construction, then they'll have priority for home ownership in the Habitat program.
They're building equity in
They're going to be building houses for Habitat, building houses for the community, building houses that they can live in, and building houses that they can own. So you want to talk about building personal wealth or a pathway to legitimate home ownership. We're talking about you have a legitimate chance to really see a clear pathway on what your future is going to be outside of the criminal justice system.
And they're building communities that they can take ownership and pride in, which is huge. I mean, you're talking about a human empowerment journey. This is almost like gamifying it, but in person.
Well,
it's super cool that way.
And I always think that you can get real creative in funding spaces and in grant writing. Youth Build is a DOL grant. It's not specific to returning citizens, but man, we can really look at kids aging out of foster care or kids who, who've struggled with traditional education. We're getting them stack certifications. They're building that sense of self-worth as well as building personal wealth. But now, let's think 5 years or 10 years down the line, and where are you going to let me? Here's Justin, this kid's named Justin. Justin's thinking about, I want to buy a house, and if I can get in the Habitat program. I've already talked to Mike Sutton about that. Is we got this guy, and he may not work for you, but he's a great candidate, and they're a great family for that. Yeah. How do we connect those pieces? And that to me is where this all comes together.
And I'm just sitting here watching you guys, and you just literally came to life talking about this work. So let me hear a little bit about, like, tell us the story. Like, what gets you up and out of bed in the morning, and how long have you been doing this work?
Well, I'm going to go quick because I've listened to Rich's story before, and his story is so much more powerful than mine. Every organization has a mission, they have a vision. I think the why is the most important thing. I've got now a 15-year-old daughter, and when she was born and I was growing up, I'm like, the why is simple. I want to live in a safer community. I want her to grow up in a safer community. When we actually create opportunities to make our community safer, we can. I ran into Charlie Crist yesterday, literally. And he's running, I guess he's going to be running for mayor in St. Petersburg, but he was the governor in Florida, and he ran for governor multiple times and has been in elected office for a long time. And we did a statewide reentry summit. And now we're going back to 2009, 2010 up in Tallahassee when he was governor. And I gave a line at this summit where I said, successful reentry is public safety policy. Successful reentry is excellent public safety policy. And I ran into him, and I always joke with him about this because he's in a debate with Rick Scott when he was running for governor years later. And he said, well, I really believe in this work because successful reentry is excellent public safety policy. And I saw Charlie, I'm like, Charlie, dude, you stole my line. He goes, it's a good line. But it's just the truth. I mean, when you connect these things, you have such an impact. So for me, I want my daughter to grow up in a safer community. That's why I do this work. I want us all to grow up in safer communities. We're sitting in an office in one of the hardest communities, from census tract and all of that kind of data in the Tampa Bay region. We're here strategically because this is where we can have the most impact. But listen, you share your story.
Okay. For me, it's a little more personal, but I agree and echo everything that he said. I was a police officer and a corrections officer for 15 years, and I suffered PTSD from nearly being killed twice. Afterwards, I retired on disability, and I got myself in trouble with the law. Never thought in a million years it would have happened to me. What happened at the time I felt was extremely unjust. And my life was falling apart. I was abusing alcohol. I was going through a divorce. My kids no longer wanted to talk to me. And my mental health was untreated at the time. And as such, I attempted to commit suicide by proxy. My roommate shot me in the back of the head with a .38. And it shattered my orbital socket in my jaw. Parts of it came out my throat. And I survived. He threw me in the back of his truck, drove me to the hospital with the police chasing him while he was drunk, and got me there in enough time for them to stabilize me and life flight me to a trauma center. And they reconstructed my face. I was always this ugly, but, I think they did an okay job. And then I was left kind of purposeless. I didn't feel like I had much left to live for. And then a neighbor across the hallway from me invited me to church. And I started hearing things about the apostles being imprisoned and Jesus being imprisoned. And I thought to myself, I'm very fortunate. I have a pension that I could live on. But people that, when I tried to go back to work, I experienced a lot of the obstacles that folks that we help experience. And I even had trouble getting a job delivering pizzas. And that was with a white collar nonviolent crime. So I decided I'd go back and try to give back, and I volunteered at a prison ministry. When I did that, the guy looked at me funny. He said, "You ever been in prison?" I said, "No, I was fortunate, got probation." He said, "Did you ever work in the prisons?" Well, I was a CO in the state prison system before being a police officer. And he said, "You were my CO."
Oh.
And he became a mentor to me. So think about that cycle, and
circle.
how God uses people in interesting ways. And he runs the largest prison ministry in the state of Ohio today. He's a published author, best-selling author, and is just a wonderful guy. If you met him, you'd never know he spent 20 years in prison. When he was young, his brother killed somebody, and he helped dispose of the body. So having his guidance kind of led me in the direction of doing some prison ministry, but I also got to thinking about the work component of this, and I started an online job board to create a list of jobs that were out there with employers that were friendly to folks with backgrounds. And I also started a social enterprise landscaping company where we hired ex-offenders. I had done some landscaping as a kid and owned my own landscaping company part-time when I was a police officer, so I had some experience in that area. The opportunity came to move to Florida, and I again volunteered at prison ministry, and they hired me on as a job developer, and I really enjoyed the work. The interaction with clients, and to watch them start with hopelessness and come out on the other end full of joy and gratefulness and being a productive member of society was extremely rewarding. And when I came over to here to PERC about 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to, really expand in that area. I helped run a program called STARS, which was a workforce development program based on tough love. I did I've had hundreds and hundreds of job placements, clients that text me or email me or call me all the time, say how grateful they are. Just had a guy just the other day talk about how the job that he got with a road construction company, we've been working in conjunction with FDOT. He felt like it was the first time in his life that somebody had treated him with that level of respect and treated him like a person, like they saw him for the first time. And that's why I get up and do this every day.
Yeah. You both are like walking, just unlocking. I mean, thank you for sharing the truth.
Sure.
As far as like that story goes deep. That's like old, memories and all kinds of things. And I'm sure that comes up. And thank you for sharing that truth first and foremost. For both of you, the service that you're doing, though, in the community to really just give them their human dignity back is so empowering just in itself. Like you said, just being seen and being actually seen as a man or a person that, yes, I made some mistakes, but I don't have to continue to walk in that shame cycle because they do that to themselves. That's an internal cycle, is so important. And, for me, I get into this, this word commerce to me. I always talk about commerce, and a lot of people look at me like, why are you talking about commerce with humans? And what commerce with humans means is exactly what you both just talked about. How can we exchange our value and create a thing, a business, a widget, a new innovation? You're talking about innovations in programs, innovations in ways that you empower people to move into the community after they've been unlocked from a prison cell. That's all forms of value exchange. And you're doing it at the human level, and you're doing it in a program level so that they can go and persist that forward for themselves after you've activated that inside of them. So have you ever thought of that from that angle of like, this is really commerce? Have you thought of like that value that PERC is serving in the community?
I've actually, and I'm not sure if I'm going to answer that exactly the way you would frame it, but I've said for a long time, like I don't necessarily, I look at human capital, like we all have value and the assets. And, to me, we don't have that hard of a job to sell. And what I mean by that is, I can come to an employer, or Rich can go to an employer and talk about training costs. And I can tell you that if you give someone a second chance, your training costs are going to go down because they're not jumping from job to job, because at first they're grateful to have a job, and then they're appreciative of the opportunity you give them. And I think that, like I look at guys we hire, we have a lot of people who work for us who have backgrounds. We have a guy who works for us who actually did our tiny house program. His name is Jaquise Monroe, but on the streets, he's known as Boss. And Boss, I like to go during Second Chance Month, they'll ask me to do panels. And I always say, you want me, I'll go, but you should hear this guy's story. Because no one recruits better for our programs than Boss does. He has this level of respect, right or wrong on the street, has a certain level of not, I guess I'm stuck on the word value, but he has a credibility that I'll never have. And people will come in because of that. In our harm reduction program, John Bailey spent 25 years away when he came out, and he was doing some part-time stuff for us in one of our transition programs. Now he has his own nonprofit called Life from the Inside Out, and we're writing him into a grant, his program into that youth build grant, because we want to do actually it's a different grant we're writing him into, but it's a criminal justice reinvestment grant. They want to see peer-to-peer stuff, and he started his own peer groups throughout South St. Petersburg. And again, and it all comes back to that, is understanding value. And then I look at it like, if we're going to talk about bottom lines, let me have a bottom line discussion with you as a business owner and how we can help you grow your business, how we can help you expand your business. I mean, shoot, years ago when we talked about the STARS program, that bakery in North Greenwood had created a third shift because we could staff that third shift, and these were pretty good paying jobs. And it's like, because I guess I get stuck on social enterprise a little bit, or commerce. Even we're looking at how do we create our own social enterprise with some of the talent we have in our organization. I have a master plumber and a master electrician who might or might not be able to start their own company, save what their charges were. That doesn't mean I can't start a company under the nonprofit, and that they could have ownership in it. And now they're building wealth, they're using their skill set, and that barrier is gone. I mean, when we talk about transportation, I'm sure, that's where Zach and I originally were talking about this, is how do we bring down barriers for that growth?
And social enterprise is a somewhat of a new term for the nonprofits as well. I mean, typically you get this stigma out there where, we have a nonprofit, you have not, and people think automatically charity and donations. That changes the language, it changes the feeling of the interactions that you're having. So I feel like there's some stigmas here that we should talk about and break down for community leaders that might be afraid, because fear is a big part. Trust is another one. Value is subjective. Those are all very subjective terms, and they're on the recipient side of when I'm talking to a business leader and they're stigmatizing this population. And then there's on the population side of, I may not want to go into some of these fields because I've been judged and shamed and, stigmatized my entire life. And that's why I've stayed outside of the system. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what's the first thing that comes to mind as far as some of those barriers that we can break down, and what tips would you offer the community to do that?
Well, I think when it comes to the business community, obviously it's a liability concern. That's their primary objection to hiring this population when I talk to them about it. But there are incentive programs out there, but by and large, statistics have shown that if people have a real value, a job where they feel valued, that has an upwardly mobile career path, they tend to recidivate far less. They tend to be grateful employees that are some of the best employees that these guys have. But it's overcoming that first objection. So a lot of times we'll take an employer like one of our major employers is TSE Industries, and we probably supply a third of their workforce. And that experience, the positive experience they've had, I always encourage, and they have also said they're open to having new employers call them and contact them and tell them what the experience is like. We have very few incidents, probably no more so than if you were just hiring a regular person off the street. And there's never a guarantee that somebody's going to be problem-free, right? But we can demonstrate the fact that these folks are long-term employees. They've moved up the ladder. We have a guy at TSE that started off in the chemical department making $17 or $18 an hour, and he's now going to be the plant manager. So, and he's probably making six figures at this point. So, and he started off in the work release center, going through the program. I believe he was a tiny house graduate. So, the examples are there. We can show and demonstrate that this is successful. And on the other side, when you're looking at the client, A lot of it just has to do with treating them like you would anybody else with respect, like you want to be treated. You have to be encouraging sometimes. They have a life of being beaten down, their dignity is taken away from them in prison. And, trying to rebuild that can sometimes be challenging because they can be their own worst enemy. They get scared. That's why we have supportive services, why we have access to mental health care. So these folks can get the support that they need, because some of them come out with nothing. They have nothing. We have to get them an ID. They need a phone. They need a place to live. And if you don't have all the basic needs covered first, they're not going to be successful in a job. So, and of course, like I said, later on, we'll be talking about transportation. That's something that we've struggled with for a long time. Transportation and housing are probably the two biggest barriers. And that's one thing I love about this organization is we're making moves to overcome those barriers. And that opens up new opportunities for these guys.
Right. I would also kind of go back to a completely different angle to that, from the employment side, in the sense of social entrepreneurship. I wanted to say a couple things. One, from the people we work with, I've always truly believed, like what Rich said, starting a landscape business, you can't get fired from the job you create for yourself, right? You can't, someone, even when we're wildly honest and super transparent, you'll still run into, oh, I didn't know this was on so-and-so's records. We're going to let him go. So I've always believed in that, but I also believe sometimes you might not be prepared for it, and understanding some of these guys are great businessmen and great businesswomen, they've made a lot of money, but they might not have always followed societal rules in doing that. But that entrepreneurial spirit is there. And, let's not pretend that it's not, or that it's something bad. From the nonprofit standpoint, I've spoken at this for a number of different, panels and different stuff like that. Being a nonprofit does not mean we're not in business to make money, right? What we do with the profits might be different than a for-profit company, but make no mistake, we're in business to make money. So we're always looking at how do we do that? This whole plaza where we're at right now, we bought it because, when all the spaces are leased out, we're making money, but there are ways to build that. Our housing program can be pretty, in the black for us, or it can be lucrative if you do it right. But if you do it right, then you're also impacting lives.
Yes.
And I think that you put those things together, because I know another person that I used to do the quarterly things at Polk Correctional. This goes back years, where they would, ask people from Pinellas to come up, and, once a quarter, all the people releasing to Pinellas, could we, talk about the services we have and things we offered. And there was this guy, his name's Anthony Ferrantino, used to come up to me every time. And his nickname from way back when was Big Hands Tony. He was a Golden Gloves boxer, old Italian guy, and was away for 24 years. He was a lower level connected mafia guy. And every time he'd come talk to me, and we built a relationship. When he came out, he built a relationship with me and a guy who's a vice president at WestCare, outpatient provider, residential provider, their substance abuse provider worldwide. And so he helped him get a job doing procurement, basically driving a van, picking up stuff for their housing programs. And then I helped set him up in a house. And we bought the house, but let him, run a housing program. And he did that. He passed away a couple of years ago. He wasn't the healthiest guy to begin with. But, he spent the last part of his life kind of giving back to the community. Was it easy? No. Was Anthony the most 100% above board guy? Probably not. Mm-hmm. But, we made those investments in him because he wanted to invest back into the community. And I think that there's a great power to that. That if we can play a role in helping enable, people just to get that. Yeah, I hate overuse the term second chances. Maybe it's second chances, maybe it's third chances. going back to the wife, for me personally, I grew up with a single mom. We didn't have anything. And I was real lucky to not,
Not go into that cycle.
because I did a whole lot of things that should have put me into that cycle,
Right.
and I was able to avoid it. But, I just think that, and having a sort of respect for that, I look at guys like, we have a guy who oversees some of our construction stuff, that master plumber. He's exhausting. He's one of the, he's always in the middle of so many things. But, a warden at Polk cleared him personally because she found his story compelling. And now she's in Tallahassee with the Department of Corrections and remembers, hey, you know what? We gave this guy a chance, and he continues to give back. Rich used to have hair before he had to deal with Keith. But, all kidding aside, Keith and his wife are involved in prison ministry now. They do things in the community, and, we were looking at the social enterprise side of that to help them build wealth. They don't need to just be great employees for PERC.
Right.
Let's help. Right. And I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the trends that you see from this community that as they feel that power come back to themselves. It's an economic activation. I love to use that term because economic activity, as the bankers and all the financial tech, and the financial services space really measure that GDP, right? And they measure the products that we're producing. But these individuals are also producing and then growing into an activation cycle of their own.
Sure.
So what kind of a ripple effect, an economic ripple effect, do you really see, or have you already seen? It sounds like it's been some amazing transformations already, but how do you report that type of data? And the reason I ask that question is because when I come out of the tech space, and the tech that we're actually, we're talking about AI and blockchain and, cryptocurrencies and all of the new tech that the communities are constantly trying to keep up with. And there's a literacy problem. There's a confidence problem. But we still want to activate them. You said it. They have an entrepreneurial spirit. And how do we continue to activate them economically so that they can participate and reach the same goals and dreams that the normal community wants, right? Whatever you define as normal.
Want to? Well, I'm sure we both have some answers to that. Even looking at St. Pete Works, when we started that program, it was a $50,000 grant funded through tax incremental funding with the city of St. Petersburg. And they were building, now it's the same COFA project, but it was called Commerce Park. And the first jobs were going to be in construction. So it kind of activated my brain of let's build some sort of social enterprise out of this. But and how do we do that? That turned into a $600,000 program that turned into a $1.2 million program that's now going to be $2 million a year. And I mention it because partnering with St. Petersburg College, everyone who goes through it's going to get some sort of AI boot camp. And this is for hard to serve populations in a community redevelopment area. It's very specific on who the target populations are. It's going to be at-risk people. It's going to be high-risk people. It's going to be returning citizens. And those collaborative partnerships that, I know we keep using the term building wealth, but I do think that it's an economic activation because, if you're not costing the system, you become a taxpayer, you become a homeowner. If you become a homeowner, you're contributing to the tax incremental funding for the next generation of people. One of the things that we were really excited about that unfortunately didn't happen was the redevelopment of the gas plant in partnership with the Tampa Bay Rays building a new stadium.
Right.
It's still going to get redeveloped. There's still going to be a whole thing. So we're excited about where that's going to go. I think there's 7 or 8 bids that the city's considering right now. All have this workforce component, all have this requirement to serve at-risk populations, because we were going to do an exclusive 4-year contract with the Heinz Rays Group because they needed to fill these requirements. And that pushing jurisdictions to, not even pushing, because we've had a series of mayors. And if Ken Welsh gets reelected or if Charlie Crist, they're both what I would call offender friendly. They believe in second chances because it's good economic policy, right? I go back to the why, if we put people in good paying jobs, if we have someone making six figures. I'm sure he's not putting it all in the bank. I'm sure he goes out to dinner. I'm sure he's paying a mortgage. I'm sure he's making a car payment. All those things are the things that you need as economic drivers in an economy. And that the more we create that way, the better opportunity we have. Being in Pinellas County, we're the most densely populated county in the state of Florida. At one point, we were the third most densely populated county in the United States. So we have this weird, unique set of circumstances where we're building up or we're building small, which where we fit. But how do we then use that? And you go back to data, we report on all this, because when you look at the people who get engaged in programming pre-release and then stay involved, the recidivism rates go from the 65, 70% down to consistently somewhere between 15 and 18%. I mean, and then you make your cost benefit analysis, because it's not hard to do. You can really translate the number, even people who, it's so crazy to me that when we look at rearrest rates or incarceration rates, that's statistically significant. If that's 45 days longer for a population, it more than triple. The savings is more than triple the amount of cost of programming. Even if they go back, I'm like, I don't want to hear the even if they go back part, but let's make the economic argument, because we can tell all these stories about these individual success stories, and that's great. It feels great, and that drives people to want to help us. And let's talk bigger picture on the economic impact in our community of what successful reentry means. And that's the story that we need to do a better job of telling, because you can have such an economic impact and drive growth on a very community level that way.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that question, Michael, is because it goes back to what Rich said at the very beginning of, there is a risk that's perceived, but the risk actually means that there's more risk if we don't fuel this type of economic activity, because as we look at, population studies and we see all of the services that a community needs to provide, if we only look at it from a risk perspective, what's the risk of not doing something?
Right.
What's the best thing that could actually happen?
So that's one of the things that when I explain the positive impacts of reentry is, if this person doesn't have gainful employment, if they don't have housing and they go back to doing what they're doing, maybe you're the next victim. You know what I mean?
That's what I mean.
So, on a very personal, guttural level,
yeah.
You know what I mean? This makes a huge difference in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm building on what he said. When I approach an employer, I never approach it from a charitable standpoint. I might use a heartstring tugging story if I feel it's appropriate, but I always approach it from an economic advantage standpoint, right? This is a value add to your business, and we can cite hundreds of examples of this. I ran the numbers from, I think we had approximately 400 folks that we placed in the first iteration of St. Pete Works. And in between what you save by the reduced recidivism, by the wages they earn, and by the amount of money that they spend in the community, the impact was well over $10 million, just from those folks. And think if you do this, we've been doing this for years now, thousands of people, and the impact that has on society as a whole. Mm-hmm. So usually the story I tell if I find somebody that's particularly resistant is I tell them this story. I said, think about you're just at the Christmas party. You had 2 drinks. Your wife calls and says, hey, the kid's sick and needs to go to the hospital. I need you home right now. So you grab a hot cup of coffee so you can sober up. You start driving home, you hit a pothole, coffee spills in your lap. Next thing you do, you look up and you just hit somebody and kill them. Your life has changed like that. You're going to prison for 10 years. 10 years of your life is gone now. And that's what happens to a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
One stupid decision can change the entire trajectory of your life. So a lot of people they don't like to look at themselves, right? They want to say, oh, those people, right? C doesn't stand for convict, it stands for caught, right? And most everybody that I know at some point in their life has done something that they could have gotten arrested for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think that something else you said too, though, is I think that when you look at barriers, though, because I've always felt so strongly and passionately that our argument to employers is an economic one. It's the economic opportunity part of it. And that, we can look and show how we can have such an impact on your bottom line that, that you could see growth. And you get those challenges from employers who are like, well, I don't want to work with so-and-so until they do, and then if you can change that dialogue, that's where you can wind up having that kind of impact. And, I've always felt it was an economic argument. I go back to when, we had the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and we had made, cost benefit analysis arguments to the county commission on a program we had created in the jail. And even though it only went away for a couple of months. On live Board of County Commission meetings, we had members of the county commission saying, yeah, but if we get rid of these programs, this isn't going to cost us more because we made the economic argument. And those, they don't touch the strings as much, but sometimes maybe the purse string arguments are the ones that we need to make.
Yeah.
But we need both.
Yeah, I think and a lot of it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Certain people see things in strictly economic terms, and we can document and prove that it makes sense that way.
Right.
As opposed to not doing anything.
I just always like to flip the argument of risk and liability back, because the risk is, you might be one person sitting in a job looking at the risk of not doing a thing or opening up a barrier or clearing a barrier. But what's the risk to the community that you aren't serving? And how long is that going to perpetuate for them? And how long are you going to keep them in a state of, there's nothing more frustrating than imprisonment. And we're literally talking about individuals that have gone away and lived in a prison, going in this mind game. So that's kind of takes me to my next question around the people that come out and they've been away serving. They're human beings. They're still uncles and fathers and dads and brothers and all of these roles, moms, and, they have these roles in the community. And if we just unlock their potential, the ripple effect to those families, the compassion that they get to now express, because there's been compassion to them, expressed to them as well. That's a huge economic vitality experiment too. It's not even an experiment. There's proof there, because you're seeing that reduce. We talk about domestic violence. We talk about, abusers and perpetrators. Mm-hmm. But if we were to help them be more vital in the community, what's the, what have you seen as far as like one of the most top stories or data points that really stand out in that regard from restoring economic vitality?
Well, I would say, on the family level for sure. I actually talked to boss, why did you decide to do this? And he has children, and he said, I wanted to be a good example to my kids, and when you break that cycle, and your kid sees a good example, and what you can achieve and what you can accomplish, the chances of them going the wrong way are far less, right? And them valuing the things that are important to growing society and growing their economic future. We had folks that were building the Gateway construction project. Those guys can take their family or their children and go, oh, I built that.
Mm.
Yeah, it's such cool stuff. One of the most amazing stories to me, and it had a tragic ending, was we had a guy in one of the early iterations of our tiny house class who graduated. He wound up going to work for a former city council member who had it turned into a manufacturing job. His little brother was in our cohorted champions program, and this guy gave this speech at a Christmas event or something. He said, I'm 24 years old, and what struck me was I'm the same age as the number of times I went away. Mm-hmm. And he's like, and now he was in the Habitat program working towards getting his own house. And he got his little brother to go into cohort because he's like, I don't want my little brother to live the life I did, because there are other chances. Someone gave me a chance. Unfortunately, the tragic ending was he drowned in a pool accident.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was just it wasn't like you went back to prison or something.
Right.
It was,
Yeah.
and I remember being when Nikki Capehart, who's the president of the Pinellas County Urban League now, she worked for the city then, and just the hair on my arm was standing. It was like, it was so powerful that, you know, that those kinds of impacts, you know, it does, you know, from the bottom line to the top line, you can kind of see it all around.
Oh, those are incredible because I think that the vitality, when you can activate that on the inside at the heart level, then it clears the mind out of that survival mode that they live in. And now they can actually get to a place of it's possible to flourish. It's possible to transform my life. It's all of those things. And then that reduces the adverse childhood experiences, as you already mentioned, which we already know creates a cycle. That is the cycle that children fall into.
What you just brought up is such an important thing that we're looking at. We actually use the ACE as an assessment tool with in some of our programs. Is we've had some people who should have been successful and weren't, and they got great jobs and they failed at the jobs at a certain point, and starting to look at, are we doing a good enough job really dealing with someone's, you know, trauma? And that's where we actually got involved in the Hubs program in St. Petersburg. We're looking at how we expand that outside of St. Petersburg because it's really trying to do a better job with trauma. Because at some point, and, you know, why did this person fail, and were they really self-sabotaging? And we're in a great employer who we're partnering with, who's like, I don't know if we should take these guys because it just feels like we get about a year in and they start self-sabotaging. So it's making us look and say, boy, can we do a better job at looking at, because we use these need responsivity tools so that but we need to do a better job of really consistently addressing this trauma, because even if we get you in a good job and you're doing well, if we've never really looked back at that, is there a limit to how well you can do at some point, you know, or do you go back to, you know, your sort of instinctive behaviors? And so those are areas that we're trying to look at to say, how do we, you know, get 6 months down and say, maybe you could get into a group like that peer-to-peer stuff that we're talking about with John Bailey, is maybe we require that, you know, or encourage that as greatly as we can, because you're going to hit a wall. Because if you've never addressed that trauma from when you were 13,
right,
you know, it doesn't matter that you're 35,
right.
You know, there comes a point where there's a limit to it.
There is. And one of the things I love about this particular realm of podcasting for me and the mission is I have many dimensions to me. So I'm a trauma-informed coach. I'm a love and authenticity practitioner, which means how do you bring that out in someone? And I can talk on the commerce side and the business side and the nonprofit side, but at the core is we're still human beings that have a nervous system, and we have, you know, responses, and trauma in that context is anything that I'm doing on the inside, I'm the only one living in here. You know, you're the only one living inside of you. And so for you, and we can create our own traumatic cycles inside of our own mind because of why emotional needs are not being met. And when those emotional needs aren't being met, it could be a social issue. It could be something I'm not able to make my own decisions because I'm not able to speak for myself and advocate. I don't feel competent. Or it could be a connection problem with, you know, the people that I'm working with. But how do I get to that intrinsic human emotional design in a way that we can help them remember and learn what their strengths are based on how they were designed? We call it temperament. Dr. Jordan Peterson is a temperament psychologist. We have a gentleman that's been on our podcast episode, talks about the human operating system. And as one of those, you know, certified individuals that can help break down that type of a map, what if we could give your person, here, this is who you were designed to be before all that stuff happened to you? And how do we help activate that inside of you? And those are the types of assessment tools that we get really passionate about. Because now I can give someone a map and says, when you start feeling this over here, these are going to be the weaknesses that are going to show up and express themselves. And you can actually recalibrate that inside of you so that you don't go do the bad thing again. You don't go get yourself in trouble, which creates this ripple effect, and you lose your job, or your wife gets mad and leaves you. And now you've got another emotional issue to deal with. And those are the types of ways that we help people empower themselves against their own trauma effects, their own storms that happen. So I love that we're getting on this topic, because those are the types of things when I can't move, it's either inside of me. I want to talk about this transportation initiative for you guys, because this is a really big initiative for you. I know it's got deep meaning for your organization, and it has absolute impact into what you're going to be doing in the community. So let's talk a little bit about that. And then there's probably so many topics. We could probably do 4 shows I'm thinking about. I'm like, there's so much here. But I do want to help celebrate what you are all getting ready to kick off. So tell me, like, what brought you to this moment of, we've got a block and another gap to fill in the community. And what is that community, or what is that gap in this transportation realm?
Well, I mean, I could tell you that my former board chair, and unfortunately he passed away about a year and a half ago, was the executive vice president at the homeless empowerment program up in Clearwater. And I knew him for about 30 years. And we had been, his heart for this work, our passion for this work. One of the biggest barriers we've seen forever, it's a simple one, but it's an unmet need, is how do you get people to and from work?
All right.
I mean, it's not super complicated, but it's as complicated as it gets. We're on public transportation in Florida. And I think that, PSTA, the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority, they do a great job with very limited resources, but they're not resources that are expanding, right? And we don't have light rail, and we don't have, all the different types of public transportation you see in other communities. And so, and if we're doing this, podcast right now in South St. Petersburg, if you want to work in manufacturing, you need to kind of get to the middle of the county, right? And if you have a car, that's maybe a 15-minute drive. If you're going to take a bus,
It's 3
you're
hours.
talking 2 hours minimum, if not 2 to 3 hours. It's not feasible.
Right.
And, and Uber and Lyft, you can try to do some of that, but that's not super cost effective. So we just started talking about, what if we bought our own vans? What if we hired our own drivers? What if we put this out and turn it into a social enterprise? Because I like playing with the math. I like playing with the numbers. Where's our cost? Where's our break even? But then going to jurisdictions on the local level, on the state level, going to private funders. We've launched what we're calling the ZAC initiative. This is something Zach and I worked on for a long time. And we're actually going to do a whole press release and stuff. We're going to do it up at HEP. Ashley Lowry, their CEO, we've been working on this, and some of their executive staff. PERC and HEP have worked together for a good 15 years. But it's just a simple concept to start.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get people to and from work? And in a cost-effective way. And it's not meant to get them to and from work forever,
Right.
but get them to and from work to where they can maybe get a car. Let's look at some of those other programs out there that help people get a car, help with insurance, help with stuff like that. So let's just start with getting people to and from work. So we're working with CareerSource Tampa Bay. I happen to be on board, looking at the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act funding, looking at Second Chance funding, look at First Step funding, different pots of money. How do we get people to and from work? So we've got 3 brand new vans. We've hired drivers. We're in that launch phase. And then that's where we met you, is how do we bring the technology into this to make this, it's not a ride share. We want to be super clear about that, but it's really, how do we get people to and from work?
And I love the fact that the reason that it really sparked my attention and curiosity is because my entire career has been spent filling gaps in the financial services space with tech. And the challenge with tech, though, is that tech stays and lives inside of, the departments and the communities that, can afford to build the tech. But as I've launched out into this nonprofit space, there's not a lot of budget to build tech, not from scratch. And there's some, things that actually get built and then they get used, but they don't really fit the niches of the community needs. And we've seen the community needs from, the Second Chance community, the ex-offenders, all the way to human trafficking survivors. And transportation is a common theme across all of them, across the spectrum. And when we heard the need and we saw the breadth of this, and we also saw the gaps, right? We saw the solution providers that were already in there. what is it that we could do to actually bring it into that niche space and just start with a small pilot like you? So we're really excited that, the foundation that I'm a co-founder of, Inspire World Foundation, has this ability to help unlock the commerce and restore commerce and the economic rhythm for individuals. That's our whole mission. But we have to do it through tech that needs to see these people. And when I say these people, it means not the ones that are living in the traditional technology world. We need to actually take technology, the best of technology, out and bring it into this community, almost in a lab environment, and apply it into the use cases that you all have in partnership, so that we can create more what we call trauma-informed technology experiences. And we use a term called tempathy. And tempathy with our partners at FiSafe. Tempathy came from Jonathan Taylor from FiSafe. He says, we come out of the banking and the credit union space, the payment space, where money moves at like lightning speed there, right? Billions and billions of dollars and minimal seconds that things are moving through. So it's the best of the best. Tempathy, though, means we're taking technology and pairing it with empathy for the use cases that you all need. And then if we can plug that technology in, we can do some incredible things for the community. So we're really excited to start the pilot with you, to look at the usability of that tech and then where it can go from there.
Yeah, we are too. And, and when so we have a couple of funding sources, but one of our biggest partners in launching this insane division is United Way.
Right.
And United Way, Gulf Coast, I always say though, it's wrong. Suncoast. Understanding what we're trying to do. And they've been a supporter of ours in our workforce programs for a number of years.
Yeah.
So we were excited that they understood, we're not going to write this elaborate, things where we're going to take 10 different metrics from the Department of Labor, in length of time,
Sure.
3 months. Let's get people to and from work.
Right.
Because what we've learned in all these projects is that we kind of start with certain things that it goes back to what you said. If we use data wisely, let's identify where those gaps are. And one of the biggest gaps is simple. It's transportation.
Right.
One of the places we got to be careful when we've had this conversation is, so then there are other places where transportation is also an issue. And, where we have a harm reduction program. How do we get people to and from appointments? How do we get people to and from job interviews? Still fits what we're trying to do. But we've got to also be careful because we can't be the be all end all to everything.
Right.
However, there's also opportunity there for us but if we can fit into some of these other spaces too, then it becomes a rapidly growing social enterprise that becomes self-funding. And that's where we want to get. I mean, even in the model of creating this program, we're talking about going to the employer side saying, hey, listen, we've heard you too. One of the biggest problems you have with some of the employees, and you don't have enough employees that they can't get to and from work because they don't have reliable transportation. Are you willing to play a role in this? Is it worth you, to invest a couple $100 a month into an employee to help us make sure they get to and from work, but we're going to guarantee they're there every day? And having those kind of collaborative partnerships, leveraging federal resources, leveraging local resources. We just got to be smarter about it.
Right. I think the attention and the focus to do that, because there's a collective problem that affects everyone, is where the true impact happens at a community level. And that's certainly where it's great to see nonprofits collaborating. It's great to see even better when that expands to the private, public, and nonprofit space. And then you add the municipality. Now you have this whole collective ripple effect that's really transformational. And I love the term placemaking. Have you guys heard that term, placemaking? But I've not seen placemaking done with a trauma-informed lens, the way that we've been encouraging it to be looked at. From, I don't care if it's, the design of our neighborhoods to, making things more aesthetically pleasing and less triggering for people. But it's also, how do we make it more inclusive for everybody, even the ones that have been traumatized or that do live outside the community and don't have the same economic resources, social and communication resources even too, that communicate differently because they don't have the same exposure to some of the higher social.
And if we think about tying these things together, imagine if I hire a driver okay, someone can drive someone. What if I hire a driver and give them training and case management?
Exactly.
So when we're driving someone to and from work, we might ask some of those questions, or we create a safe space. Harm reduction programs unrelated to transportation, they're controversial. They're controversial for parts of it. And then with the new administration in Washington, Health and Human Services sees the world in a different way. I'm not going to make any political statements here. Um, One of the greatest things in harm reduction is that you play the long game with it. Is that if we're doing something like needle exchange, it sounds crazy to people. But if the same person starts building that relationship with the person helping them, we're averaging about 8 to 10 people a month in the last few months going directly from our program into treatment, that they feel comfortable, that you create those relationships. Because again, I go back to, some of the people who haven't been successful and they reach a certain point. We haven't really dealt with that trauma. We haven't really dealt with some of those underlying issues, those real risks as to why they maybe haven't been successful their whole adult life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can find some out of the box ways to do that.
Yeah.
And by linking those things together, we'll see what kind of success we get from it. And one of the things that excites me about this project is it's going to be data informed as well as trauma informed. And we're not perfect, but we like to believe we're a trauma informed agency. We do training with staff. We're trying to do motivational interviewing. But imagine having a driver who's sat through motivational interviewing and can say, hey, you know what, we need to follow up with so-and-so just to see how they're doing. We've had employers. I remember some of the people at TSE who, well, can we build our own houses? Because this person's got, I'm like, listen, hold on a second, and they got to get buy-in from ownership. In private industry, they may have a board of directors, everything we do too. In the nonprofit world, but it's like, let's
But the
kind of do
excitement
this.
is building.
But of course it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's building them. And that takes me back to the power of words as a whole. And I go back to the same thing. I challenge, a compliance officer at a financial institution, the same as I would challenge an insurance underwriter. Risk is subjective, right? Depending on the chair and the mask and the role and the costume that you're sitting in. And so when I hear harm, I hear the same thing. Harm is subjective. I'm going to harm myself. Okay, I'm in control of myself. That's my choice, my free will. And I understand it's controversial, but the very word harm is still a subjective word.
Yeah.
But what if we can do things that help people from stop making that choice to self-harm, whether it's alcohol or drugs or, they have different coping mechanisms. That's what we're talking about. And there's an escape that's needed because their emotional needs aren't being met. And that's the bottom line. And so anytime that we can smooth and harmonize those emotional needs, then we all win as a community. So,
and we go back to where we started this conversation.
That's right.
How do we make our community stronger? How do we make our community more vibrant? How do we make our community safer? All these things they're interdependent. They're not exclusive to themselves.
Right.
They all can work together in harmony. And the more we can do, I still believe in, we can be progressive in a society and be woke and be all these things that sometimes have strangely odd connotations now. What if we do these things together? Because I'm going to tell you, it's also going to increase personal wealth. It also can increase the wealth of businesses. It can also increase GDP. It can also be an economic driver, a growth driver. Let's put all those things together.
And think about how much growth you get if you have all the economically marginalized people in the country now being able to contribute in a way that's productive and build wealth. Everybody wins. I mean, there's no losers there.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it takes intentional focus and effort and collaboration. And I think sometimes humans have forgotten how to collaborate. We've gotten really siloed in our industries and our professional expertise areas, but we have so many gifts and talents that we can bring together when we truly enter with a collaborative spirit to serve what we call, the best of everyone. And when we do that, now we're in a conscious capitalism place. We have restoration and regeneration going on. And those are really powerful words when you start plugging them into economic and business principles.
And when we do that, it changes the narrative from restorative is somehow a hippy dippy word. We're all just trying to do good. You're just do good. No,
I like
no.
thinking about all the restorative work that's happening in houses and hotels and old
Absolutely,
buildings
because
now.
all of these things are also economic drivers.
They are.
Let's marry them. Yeah, let's not marry them. They're already married. Let's highlight that they're married and use that as a way to build community.
And I think there's an invitation here. And I think what I've heard is you've issued an invitation to come and think innovatively with us, right? Come and collaborate and let's pool resources so that we can do incredibly transformative things in our communities. And you're looking at the gaps specifically, and there's a lot of stakeholders around those gaps that can serve the community together.
That's one thing I love about this organization is that there's thinking outside the box. People are, Michael, it comes up with these great ideas. And, it just, he welcomes you to bring your ideas, and addressing the problems, seeing these problems and going about it in a way that hasn't been done before, or, maybe isn't being done before here in this area. It makes it a lot of fun.
It can be really refreshing too. And I love that, as far as the innovative thinking, when we come from we use a term, and we learned this from Dr. Shelley Wagers over at the University of South Florida TIP Lab and the Bright project there. It's on a different spectrum of, from like I said, the wide gamut is on the human trafficking side, but she's doing amazing work there. And what we learned as we really leaned into this, what does it mean to be trauma informed in a private organization that doesn't serve the underserved markets? What does that even mean? And how do we teach people those principles? And Shelley and Dr. Wagers, she really just said, it comes down to 4 words: least sophisticated, most vulnerable user. Design for that, and you'll get everything right from there. So
it's powerful.
It's
very powerful, right? And she's coming from that criminology background, and what is it that creates, the cycle that we're all talking about, that we're trying to disrupt. And I took that to the technology space of where I come from, building banking and payment systems for the last 30 years, going, how do we get the developers to become trauma-informed enough, just like you're doing with their driver, to become trauma-informed and aware enough so that when their keys start creating code that we've designed now for the least sophisticated, most vulnerable user.
Yeah. I mean, I look at, some of these guys that have been in prison 30, 40 years. I had a guy in Tampa when I worked over there. He was part of when it was determined it was unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was one of the first group released. And he had gone into prison when he was 16 or 17 years old for murder. And it was felony murder. He didn't actually pull the trigger. He was with the group, with the guy that did. And he thought he'd never see the light of day. He had never seen technology, never seen a cell phone, never seen a computer. We had to teach him all that stuff. He was just completely like a deer in the headlights, and if you can gear technology that somebody like that can pick it up and intuitively use it, I think that's fantastic.
That's the path that we're on. So those are the missions. That's the way that we pay it forward in our community with our expertise, is how can we go and encourage the financial institutions, the tech, any of these tech companies, the developers. You see blockchain for good. You see, tech for good. You see all of these for good hashtags out there. Well, let's actually create and activate on that. And how do we get the developers into programs at these colleges, in these tech schools, and trauma-informed? And trauma-informed is not a standardized way of teaching that. It requires a whole bunch of knowledge of the human biology, the nervous system, the parasympathetic and, sympathetic nervous system, what's happening inside of that person with PTSD and, complex PTSD. That's a whole lifetime worth of experience. How do we, synthesize that down into a coherent, kind of resonating program for the developers to learn enough to actually change a little bit of how they go after it? But it's more than that. It's the funders for the tech as well have to make that decision to allow that extra development to happen.
Yeah. I was in coaching for a long time, and, people would say to me, I coached at a private school in North County for a while. And then I coached at a public school in South County. Oh my God, that's so much harder. Like, you know what? poor kids, rich kids, people without parents in the house, people with parents in the house, they all have problems. Everybody's had that. I mean, everyone's had trauma. You know, we can't just say because you have both parents. I had a guy whose kid was so messed up on designer drugs, he went to sleep in a car he broke into after a party and wanted me to have him on extra sprints. Says that's because me as a football coach, that's going to be the answer. I'm like, you got problems that are so much bigger than what I'm going to be able to do having him run sprints. You know, I mean, trauma is a real thing that we all experience. And how do we respond to that? You know, I happen to run an organization. We're an organization that works with people who've dealt with trauma and have been impacted with the criminal justice system. But I think your approach or that concept of, you know, because that's in a way how we should approach employers. Listen, you have people on your staff right now that have trauma. Don't be so scared of mine because at least they're dealing with it.
Right.
You know, they've had consequences to it. What's going to happen when your senior vice president of whatever, you know, has a breakdown? Are you prepared for that?
Right.
Are you going to look at them the same way as this person who has turned her life around because they've fought through those battles? Let's just put it in some perspective. That
They're still human beings. Those are babies that were born, and you don't pick which baby is going to end up going through trauma.
Comes back to kind
journey.
of what I said earlier about people don't want to look inward, you know, or my trauma's not nearly as bad as your trauma, you know. Well, you know what? If it is to you, you know, then that's all that matters, right? It's not a comparison, right? It's like, is it impacting you? And more than likely, some trauma you've been through has impacted you at some point in your life. And, you know, unless you're willing to deal with that and recognize that, you know, it's going to cause issues.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I called this show Unlocking Commerce, is because as human beings, we are the store and source of our own value. And if we're all locked up inside, we're not going to change that value with other people. We're going to be in our own worlds and, you know, just unable to do that. So commerce is very personal. It's very subjective. And it's also societal. It's nation. It's global. But at the same time, it still starts with the individual. So I just want to, again, thank you guys for being on the show with me. This was an incredible conversation. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to seeing more of the transformation that comes out of your transportation initiative.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Right.
Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and change makers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and change makers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly. You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.